There isn't much to say in our COVID-19 update that hasn't already been said before. The United States, India, and Brazil are still the reigning champions for case numbers, with pockets of case spikes in Korea, Japan, and Turkey. The United States did however break new ground this month, recently becoming the first country on Earth with more than 1 million confirmed COVID deaths. We extend our sincere congratulations to the winners. This month saw a surprising amount of elections all at once, so to kick things off, we are visiting the Philippines. The presidential election follows the 6-year single term of the infamous Rodrigo Duterte, who frequently made headlines for his violent war on drugs and the steady flow of criticism from human rights organizations. As Filipino presidents are only allowed to run for a single term, the position was up for grabs for 2 new candidates, with the race eventually boiling down to former Vice President Leni Robredo and the son of a previous president, Bongbong Marcos. Looking objectively, Leni Robredo is a very typical politician. Born to a local judge, she would go on to earn a degree in economics, then later passed the bar exam for her law degree on her second attempt. Robredo would go on to win her first local election in 2013 and assume the office of vice president in 2016. Leni Robredo's policies have included providing low-interest loans to small businesses, a push to make all government expenses transparent to the public, and aims to provide unemployment insurance to those who have been removed from their jobs. Bongbong Marcos, on the other hand, is anything but a typical presidential candidate. In 1965, Bongbong's father Ferdinand would be elected president, gaining popularity after naming himself, quote, the most decorated war hero in the Philippines, a claim that the United States Army would call both fraudulent and absurd. During his first term in office, Ferdinand would preside under a strong economy. However, by his second term, his infrastructure projects funded by foreign debt would come back to bite him in the ass, leading to both mass inflation and social unrest. In 1972, the president would place the country under martial law with the help of a bullshit referendum, and the entire nation would take a turn for the worst. Ferdinand Marcos was now effectively a dictator, revising the constitution to his will, silencing media outlets, and undertaking a series of targeted killings and summary executions. The extent of this brutality is hard to properly quantify. However, Amnesty International estimates that the Marcos dictatorship was responsible for 3,200 killings, 35,000 documented cases of torture, and 70,000 incarcerations. Eventually, in 1986, a revolution would force the Marcos family to give up power, and with the help of Ronald Reagan, would be granted asylum in Hawaii. Ferdinand and his wife would later be placed in the Guinness World Records for the largest ever theft from a government, stealing anywhere between $5 and $10 billion from the nation's central bank. This brings us to Bongbong himself, who was later granted permission to come back into the country in 1991. Before seeking political office shortly after. By this stage in his life, Bongbong was no stranger to politics, previously serving as vice governor of the Ilocos Norte region at the young age of 23. The qualifications for this position were of course as non-existent as you might expect, as despite studying at both Oxford and the University of Pennsylvania, he would never graduate from either. Bongbong would go on to be appointed in mostly bullshit positions, where he could draw a salary without actually doing anything, and after his period of exile, he would eventually strike a deal where all charges would be dropped if he still got to keep 25% of the money his family stole. In 2016, he would attempt to run as vice president, eventually losing to his later rival, Leni Robredo, but this defeat wouldn't have him down for long. The story goes that on one fateful night in September 2020, Bongbong and his wife would be watching the critically acclaimed Ant-Man at their private residence, when he would then proclaim, quote, "Okay, we're gonna do this." When his wife asked him to clarify what he meant by this presumably Ant-Man related statement, he then replied, "Run for the presidency." Regular viewers are probably aware that we sometimes like to make up obviously absurd statements for comedic value, but in this instance, this story was verified by Bongbong's wife. It's safe to say that something this absurd is far beyond our creative capacity to fabricate. In terms of specific policies, Marcus promised to continue the infrastructure program for job creation, which was started by the previous administration, as well as turning the nation into what he calls a logistics hub in the Asian region. He also plans to develop renewable energy sources, legalize divorce, and provide tax incentives for small businesses. It's important to stress that people should never be judged by the actions of their parents, and although Bang Bang didn't choose to be born as the son of a ruthless dictator, there's still a myriad of questions around both his legitimacy and character. When the ballots were eventually cast on the 9th of May, Bang Bang Marcus would win, with an impressive 59% of the vote, while Leni Robredo would come in second, with just under 28%. This result might surprise many viewers, as the Marcus family name has seen more atrocities than a Syrian child can point their prosthetic limbs at, but much of this comes down to both a successful rebranding campaign since the early 2000s, as well as well-documented internet trolls who have been paid to influence voting behavior. The average Filipino spends more time on the internet than any other nationality in the world, and when considering 92% of fact checks about Bang Bang Marcus were either found to be false or misleading in his favor, while 96% of disinformation targeting Leni Robredo was negative, it's easier to see why exactly the results turned out in such a clear victory. Bang Bang Marcus will now serve his 6-year term as president until 2028, and only time will tell if he'll be able to reform his family legacy or follow in the footsteps of his ruthless father. Perhaps not quite as exciting, the United Kingdom held its local round of elections this month, where votes were cast to fill over 4,400 council seats, contested across England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Predictions before the polls opened were almost certain that the nation's Conservative Party would be losing a myriad of seats across the country, but that it would still be a loss for their left-leaning opposition if the losses weren't significant. As it turned out, the losses were very much significant, as while it was determined that losing 400 seats would be code red levels of disastrous, they would go on to lose 485, mostly to Labour, the Liberal Democrats, and the Green parties. Why these local elections even matter is because they are often helpful to gauge the popularity of the current government, which is now currently around halfway through its term. Local elections are also helpful to measure the popularity of platforms that will go on to be pushed at a national level when the top job is up for grabs. With this in mind, Labour voters shouldn't be expecting an easy win at the national polls, as many analysts believe that many voters made their choice in protest of the recent scandals that have plagued the Conservative Party, as opposed to genuine support for Labour and its policies. The United Kingdom has had a Conservative Prime Minister since 2010, so even with these recent results, they still hold a significant foothold across the motherland. Next up we have the Australian federal elections, which much like the others we've mentioned this month, have been categorized by the changing of the times. Elections within Australia are a special kind of affair, as because voting is mandatory, it's become tradition to show up to a polling venue, eat yourself a democracy sausage, and ride your kangaroo off into the sunset. Australia also has a system of ranked choice voting, where instead of voting for a single party, citizens are able to list each party from most to least favorite, which tends to give more support for minor parties within the country. The party in power going into the election was a coalition between the Liberal Party and the National Party, which is kind of like how people can fuse together to become stronger in Dragon Ball Z. The coalition, as they are often called, are generally moderate to right-leaning, depending on the member, and have operated on a platform of mostly conservative ideals, of supporting smaller business, lowering taxes, and rebuilding the economy after COVID-19. Viewers might remember its leader as the man who famously shat himself in Engadine McDonald's in 1997, which still has a plaque on location to commemorate its significance in Australian history. Their main opposition is the Labour Party, a centre-left faction in Australian politics, who ran on a platform of strengthening the nation's healthcare system, investing in domestic jobs, and reducing the cost of living. Its trump card during the election was having an environmental policy in the first place, after the coalition leader famously showed up to last year's UN climate conference empty-handed, and in 2017, brought a lump of coal into parliament. By election night, it appeared as if the secret weapon had worked as intended, as the coalition would go on to win its lowest proportion of seats since 1946, leading to a victory for the Labour Party. However, many would argue that Labour wasn't the biggest winner of the night, as around a third of all votes were either minority parties or independents, meaning Labour itself only won around 30% of all votes. Of these minor parties, the Greens were the most prevalent, scoring over 10% of all ballots cast, achieving a level of popularity not seen for over a decade. Political commentators believe that the results of the election weren't due to the Labour Party's popularity, but rather because of the sheer dissatisfaction with the previous government. This follows an interesting trend among Western nations, where recent elections have been in favor of more progressive parties, not because they've been particularly likable, but because people have specifically voted against the more conservative alternative. The United States, United Kingdom, France, and now Australia all appear to serve as recent examples of this trend. Viewers from any countries, mentioned or not mentioned, may be interested in today's sponsor. If you want the shitty superpower to appear anywhere in the world, then you'll probably want a VPN. Surfshark VPN makes protecting your online privacy and watching prohibited Netflix shows easier than breaking the law in North Korea, and you can rest easy knowing that your privacy will be infinitely more secure compared to the average citizen within the country. Gone are the days of having to borrow your Aunt Donna's DVD box set of The Crown. Simply change your location to anywhere you like and appreciate a whole cornucopia of new media to enjoy. Signing up with the code on screen will give viewers an 83% discount, 3 months for free, and viewers who aren't 100% satisfied can back out in the first 30 days and get a full refund. Surfshark VPN, it's cheaper than the other ones. Meanwhile, surveyed university students were overestimating their starting salary by 88%. Texas state troopers are told they need to lose weight in order to keep their jobs, and a local sheriff in Florida tells people to shoot home invaders as a way to save taxpayer money. It's no secret that there are some serious advantages to a globalized and ever-connected world, as it's left us in the most peaceful and collaborative time in recorded history. However, it also means that when one country decides to invade another, the entire world tends to suffer collectively. The United Nations has voiced growing concerns of food insecurity, which has taken center stage with the invasion of Ukraine. When looking at wheat, for example, Russia has historically provided around 17% of all wheat sold internationally, while Ukraine alone produces a whole 6% of all calories sold on the international market, with one of these nations having the championship title for being the most sanctioned country in the history of the world, and the other being actively invaded. This is likely to have alarming consequences on global food supplies. According to the United Nations, global food prices are already 30% higher when compared to this time last year. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres publicly expressed his concerns on the matter, stating that alongside both pandemic and climate change related setbacks, the Ukrainian invasion threatens tens of millions with malnutrition and eventually outright famine. As it currently stands, there's still enough food to go around. However, with Ukraine's harvest season fast approaching, the country could soon reap what it never sowed in the first place. If current predictions are to be believed, Ukraine's grain output could be reduced by at least 45%, which is made even more troubling, considering both France and Germany have been suffering a dry season, while the United States has contended with droughts. According to Mr. Guterres, the only effective solution currently available is to reintegrate Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus back into the global food market, something he admits would take a great deal of goodwill from all parties involved. In most wealthy nations, a global food shortage would likely lead to higher prices at the supermarket. However, in areas within Africa and the Middle East, the war in Ukraine could become just as deadly. According to a New York-based company specializing in agricultural forecasting, the world is only 10 weeks away from running out of wheat altogether, a prediction which was made 10 days before this video went live. Viewers who have been watching for an extended period of time may remember Alexander Lukashenko, the undisputed leader of Belarus, who's long been allies to Vladimir Putin himself. Aside from becoming famous for his signature look as a used car salesman, Lukashenko also made headlines in August 2020 when he would rig the nation's election and force nearly every opposition leader to either flee into exile or outright go missing. The ensuing protests would later be quelled with the help of Russian support, making Lukashenko a kind of mini-boss before you could take down Putin at the end of the game.
I don't know what I'm doing! Ah! Shit! Fuck me! Shit! What the fuck?
If Putin is Godric the Grafted, Lukashenko is more like Margit, and as long as we're doubling down on Elden Ring comparisons, Vladimir Zelensky would probably be General Radan. Since the start of the invasion, Lukashenko has allowed Belarus to act as a staging point from where Russian troops have made their advance from the north, but due to overwhelming public outcry, the nation has stopped short of actually providing support with its own armed forces. This month, however, Mr. Lukashenko seemingly expressed doubts about the invasion, stating that not only has this so-called special military operation dragged on, but that he would not consider himself immersed enough to know whether it was even going to plan. Days later, in the middle of the month, Mr. Lukashenko would attend a summit of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is pretty much Putin's fan club, made up of Russia, Belarus, Armenia, the Kyrgyz Republic, and Tajikistan. If you bought NATO from Wish, you'd probably get these guys delivered to your door. During the summit, Lukashenko would announce that had the other members pulled their weight with the invasion, Belarus wouldn't be suffering such harsh sanctions, which as of right now, have amounted from anywhere between 16 to 18 billion in annual exports to Western nations. He would then go on to double down on Russia's bullshit excuse to invade, stating that the reason NATO has been supporting Ukraine in the war is because its members are made up of Nazis who are still scared to openly fight the as of those who defeated them in World War II. We'd once again like to remind viewers that the reason these claims are so obviously outlandish isn't to convince those with any amount of intelligence, but rather to reinforce these beliefs within Russia, where the flow of information has already been heavily restricted. Viewers who want to keep up with all the funniest claims by Putin and his allies can be sure to click the bell icon below, and we'll personally deliver a notification every time we have a new video to share. Meanwhile, fast food restaurants are sued for making food look bigger. A state representative for Oklahoma proposes mandatory vasectomies, and US mass shootings are down when compared to the same month last year. Sticking with the United States, and the start of this month saw a leaked landmark decision by the Supreme Court, which showed a vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. The 1973 Roe v. Wade case quite famously ruled that the US Constitution would protect a woman's liberty to choose to have an abortion without excessive government restriction. The ruling would pass at a vote of 7-2, which is especially significant because there have only been a handful of rulings in the court's history which have been this lopsided. Although this new decision to overturn this now 50-year-old ruling is not yet official, members of the Supreme Court have confirmed its legitimacy, meaning if all else holds true, abortion will not be protected federally sometime into the future. As viewers probably expect, the news caused an uproar among the American populace almost immediately, with protests breaking out the very same day that the leak was confirmed to be legitimate. The abortion debate within the United States has long proved one of the most controversial policies within the country, and much of this has to do with its complexity. Abortion advocates argue that banning abortion restricts freedom for women and tends to lead to worse outcomes for children who may not have had parents who are properly equipped to raise a family. Advocates also argue that the demand for abortion is inelastic, meaning whether legal or not, people who want an abortion will get them, regardless of the law, whether this means traveling to somewhere where the practice is legal or undertaking much more dangerous alternatives. According to a study released by a pro-choice policy institute in 2018, 22,000 women die from unsafe abortions every year, most of which occur in developing nations. On the other hand, advocates against abortion argue that the rights of the unborn begin before the start of the first trimester of pregnancy. By definition, this means that any abortion would be the equivalent to murdering someone on the street, which is why those against the practice are so horrified at the prospect. As you might have noticed, the problem behind the abortion debate is that it's very much a question of ethics. What this means is that people from both sides are usually stuck in a perpetual state of disagreement, as they are essentially arguing over entirely different topics. Another fun part of this debate is down to the general wackiness of the Supreme Court. The US Supreme Court is made up of 9 justices, who are all appointed for life and are all elected by the US president at the time. Despite what you might think, Supreme Court justices don't actually need any specific qualifications, meaning theoretically, an Italian-born 19-year-old who never finished high school could be appointed if they somehow got through the screening process. All of this combined also means that the collective opinion of the Supreme Court is up to RNG. This is because when justices either die or retire from the position, they are then replaced by whoever happens to be president at the time, and although the president can't tell them how to vote, they can instead choose people who politically align with their party. As you might imagine, this has led to a strange game of musical chairs, where the party in power is incentivized to fill as many seats as possible, with ideally the youngest appointees they can. The founding fathers would be proud. The decision to overturn Roe v. Wade could simply be a sign of the times, while others have argued that the initial reasoning was fundamentally weak in the first place. In any case, the ruling to overturn the decision won't actually outlaw the practice within the United States, but rather, it will allow the states to choose for themselves whether the practice should remain legal within their jurisdiction. Judging by the current divisive state of US politics, the abortion question for each state is very likely to come down to whether their favorite color is blue or red. Coming back to Ukraine, and we'll first check in on the situation on the ground. After Russia's failed attempt to push into the capital of Kiev early in the invasion, they now appear to have committed to its more promising progress in the east and south of the country. Russia now controls roughly 90% of the east and Luhansk region, as well as much of neighboring Donetsk, and with the siege of Mariupol ending with a Russian victory, it appears as if the entire Donbass region could soon be entirely occupied. In the north, however, the country's second largest city of Kharkov has been completely retaken by Ukrainian forces since fighting began at the end of February. You could say that Russia made their escape from Kharkov. With that fun joke out of the way, let's talk about genocide. According to a report from 30 internationally recognized legal scholars and experts, Russia is guilty of both inciting and having the intent to commit genocide, which would legally oblige other countries to step to the defense of Ukraine. The report found that there were reasonable grounds to conclude that Russia is in breach of 2 specific articles of the 1948 Genocide Convention by not only forcibly transferring Ukrainian children to Russia, but by publicly inciting genocide within the country. Russian leadership and Russian state media have consistently incited resentment for those within Ukraine, frequently denying the existence of a distinct Ukrainian identity and implying that those who self-identify as Ukrainian are a threat to the unity of Russia. The report also looked into the language used by Russian officials when depicting the Ukrainian people, with terms like zombified, bestial, subordinate, and scum, all intended to make Ukrainians seem subhuman. For a government who wants its people to believe that they've launched a military campaign to fight Nazis, they are certainly acting very Nazi-like. Within the Swag News team, we tend to be very opinionated on certain topics and don't always agree on certain issues and beliefs, but we do our best to filter this out during the final product. Our video on the last US election, for example, was rewritten and combed over twice to minimize bias, but to even pretend that Russia isn't morally reprehensible in this invasion would be lying to ourselves and you as an audience. The Russian state have deported over 1 million Ukrainians into Russia, used some of the most indiscriminate weapons known to man, targeted civilians, cultural landmarks, hospitals, and power plants, and have kidnapped, sexually abused, tortured, and executed hundreds of innocent civilians since the start of their bullshit invasion. Vladimir Putin has now sent over 15,000 of his own people to die in this pointless war, most of who were conscripted soldiers who were born after the year 2000 and were told they would be greeted as liberators to the people of Ukraine. In the end, no amount of whataboutism by Russian trolls or mental gymnastics by people with half a brain cell could possibly justify the sheer level of evil that Russian leadership has put on display. In terms of international developments, this month saw the United States dwarf its previous $13 billion emergency measure as it would go on to sign off on a $40 billion package to assist Ukraine in its own defense. Much like previous packages, the legislation passed through Congress virtually unopposed, and it aims to provide $20 billion in military assistance, $8 billion in economic support, $5 billion to address global food shortages, and $1 billion to assist refugees. The amount of money the United States has given to Ukraine has inadvertently highlighted Russia's comparatively tiny economy, as the $50 billion sent in the past 4 months is the equivalent to around 75% of Russia's entire 2021 military budget. We've mentioned this before, but the US actually has 3 whole states whose individual economies are bigger than the entirety of Russia. Fucking wild. Moving away from Uncle Sam, the European Union has also been hard at work with their own projects to make Putin's life a little more stressful, as the EU have proposed a new and exciting wave of sanctions, the most significant of which would phase out all Russian oil by the end of the year. On both sides of this deal, the results are going to sting like a bitch. In Germany, for example, Russian oil supplies roughly a third of its electrical grid, meaning the nation will have to start importing from more expensive alternatives while it intensifies its push toward renewable energy. Russia, on the other hand, looks to be just as fucked as Europe, as oil and gas exports make up a staggering 40% of the country's federal budget reserves. This means that Russia will have to either diversify its economy in a time where a third of the world refuses to do business, or settle for selling its natural resources to alternative buyers at a reduced rate. In another surprising twist of events, the Scandinavian nations of Finland and Sweden have formally requested to join NATO, which follows nearly a century of neutrality. In what initially seemed to be a process which would be almost immediately approved, the 2 soon-to-be members would later be blocked by Turkey, who would criticize the 2 countries of harboring militant separatists who aim to establish an independent state within the country. A lot of this is caught up in Turkey supporting a different faction in the Syrian civil war, which at this point is just that Simpsons gag, where everyone is betting on the 2 monkeys fighting to the death. As new NATO members need to be unanimously accepted, this has led many to believe that Turkey is using this opportunity to leverage these applications as a political tool. Others have speculated that Turkish President Erdogan is simply using the applications as an opportunity to boost his domestic popularity at a time where the Turkish economy is particularly weak and the next election is only a year away. In any case, most commenters believe that both Sweden and Finland will eventually be approved to join NATO, meaning in the event they get attacked, they'll immediately have the full military support of most of Europe, Canada, and the United States, something that Ukraine didn't have at the time of the invasion. At this stage in the video, with news finally over, we usually like to talk about special developments or exciting announcements, and although we've been busier than ever behind the scenes, we are not yet ready to show off what we've got in store. What we will say is that viewers like yourself who watch, share, and even donate to the channel are truly the lifeblood of the series. With how many people now contribute to the news and other projects on the channel, it simply wouldn't be possible without your help. We hope you enjoyed watching this month's entry for the series, and we'd like to wish everyone a happy second half of 2022.